one-party rule. What has
Sitting here
1 year of
listening to
Democrat-controlled
Newsmax, ladies
Washington
and
given
gentlemen,
us? Shortages,
about that
inflation, crime, chaos,
that invasion that's
division,
taking
and
place
failure.
with
One party,
Russia and
1
Ukraine.
year. I'm Kevin McCarthy. Together we can stop Joe
You know what I'm
Biden's
saying?
disastrous agenda. We can end one-party rule, fire Nancy Pelosi.
Right about
take
now,
our
man, Joe
country back.
Biden, that
Go to
motherfucker and shit,
firepelosi.com to join our
that
fight.
you kind of
I'm
feel
Kevin
sorry
McCarthy.
for him,
I
but
approve
you
this
don't.
message because America
That's who
deserves
he is
better.
right
McCarthy
now,
Victory
y'all.
Fund is responsible for
Kind of
this
feel sorry
advertisement.
for that weak
Attention
weasel.
timeshare owners. Are you
But
dissatisfied with your timeshare?
can't feel
Tired
sorry
of
for
the
somebody that
financial
don't feel
burden?
sorry for
Timeshare
themselves.
Defense Attorneys is the number
You
one
know what I
law
mean,
firm in the
ladies and
country,
gentlemen?
providing an affordable solution to cancel your
For
timeshare
real.
with an A+ Better
You know
Business
black
Bureau rating
folk,
and
you know how
100%
black
client
folk is.
satisfaction
They
guarantee.
quick to
It
be like,
works, it's
oh, that's a
legal,
shame
it's
what they
that
doing to
simple.
that
The
man.
consultation is free, so call
That man wasn't fit to be in the motherfucking White House
844-264-1234.
anyway.
That's
Y'all know that.
844-260-1234.
He wasn't ready for this.
Call now.
He wasn't ready for this
Guys,
lifestyle,
your
yo.
masculinity is too important to
He
trust
wasn't
to
about
believe
that
in
life.
outdated formulas.
I keep
Test
telling y'all
X180
that.
for Force Factor is powerful, helping you boost
Joe
total
Biden wasn't about that
testosterone,
life.
build muscle, increase energy, and improve performance. Rush to Walmart for Test
You know what I'm
X180 from
saying?
Force Factor.
Real talk, y'all.
All right, welcome
Russia
back.
got all
Another
the oil,
update,
right?
to tell everyone, UEFA, the European soccer organization, Bianca, has just
I
announced
mean, they
they're
waiting for
pulling
Joe
their
Biden to
Champions
come
League
up to
final
talk,
game
but he was supposed to
out
come
of
up
St. Petersburg.
an
That's when it was
hour
scheduled to
ago,
be held. It's
y'all.
kind of like the Super Bowl for European club soccer, so that's
He was
no
supposed
longer
to hit the
happening. We're also
podium an
now hearing as
hour
well,
ago, y'all. Ain't
that,
heard nothing from that
Ukrainian
man,
refugees
y'all.
are starting to arrive in Poland, the first wave of people evacuating that country.
And,
We got
the European
refugees
Union is
arriving
responding to
in
Russia's
Poland, y'all.
invasion of Ukraine overnight. You can see here on the map how close they are to Ukraine. The EU planning what's being described as the harshest package of sanctions ever considered against Russia. But with everything happening, you wonder
Them
if
sanctions
this
don't
will
mean
even
shit.
matter to Putin at this time.
I mean,
Let's get out to our
that
Rome
man
correspondent, Alex Salvi,
is a
who's live with
billionaire.
some more reaction
It's
from
gonna
Italy
affect the
and what you're
people,
hearing there.
but it's not
Alex.
affecting him and the soldiers.
John Bianco, over the last hour, we're
See
learning
what
that
I'm
the White
saying?
House has reached an agreement with G7 leaders as far as coordinating their sanctions package. But of course, that's only one half of the equation. The other half is focusing on the European Union and those 27 member states who say that they'll impose the harshest sanctions that bloc has ever implemented. And those measures include freezing Moscow's assets, halting its bank access to European financial markets, and targeting Kremlin interests. But the EU will also target Russia's energy sector, although there is some conversation behind the scenes right now about how far that will go, acknowledging the fact that Germany and Italy are both very dependent on that gas. But EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was saying that the intent of all of these sanctions are to deliver a very clear message to Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Putin ain't trying to
We
hear
will
this
hold
shit.
Russia accountable for this outrageous violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and the territorial integrity. And what is at stake is not just Donbass, it's not just Ukraine. What is at stake is the stability of Europe and the whole international order, our peace order.
Ain't no peace. Putin said ain't no peace.
Now the White House, G7 leaders, and
They
the
don't want
European Union
peace.
up to this point
They
have
want
been pretty
war.
coordinated in their
We want
response.
what's
But
his.
even when it comes to
That's
these
what
latest
Putin
sanctions,
said.
there is some discrepancies between EU member states and what the Ukrainian government is asking for. Eliminating Russia from the SWIFT global
China
banking
sitting
system
back
would be
watching.
one of the most harsh steps
North
that the
Korea
EU could take
sitting
against
back
Russia,
watching.
but it reportedly will not be in this upcoming stage of
Afghanistan.
sanctions. This is a measure that's been urged by the Ukrainian
Taliban
government, and a
sitting
recent
back
submission to
watching.
the United Kingdom shows what the
Iran
Ukrainian
sitting
government
back
exactly
watching.
is looking for. Demands include banning
Iraq
energy
sitting
trades
back
with Russia,
watching.
prohibiting investments in Russian assets,
Like, damn,
disconnecting the
is
country
that
from
sweet?
Visa and MasterCard payment systems, and freezing the assets and revoking the passports of certain individuals and their families, and repatriating them back to Russia. So these proposals were just submitted about 2 hours ago, but we should get an update on the steps that the EU does decide to take by the end of the night, as well as an update from President Biden as far as the agreements that he made with G7 leaders.
Yep, Alex Salvi live in Rome, and that
G7 leaders.
update from President Biden, as you know, John,
Putin
was
threatened
supposed to
them
happen at
too,
12:30, and now it was pushed to 1:30. Now 1:32. We are still waiting to
telling
hear
y'all
from our
what's
president on this and potential sanctions. Alex, thank you.
Let's welcome in retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. He's the president of the London Center for Policy Research, also a national security advisor for the Trump 2020 campaign. Tony, great to see you as always.
Hey, John, always great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Sad.
You know,
man.
when we look at the prospect of additional military action, we also have to, take into consideration the cyber threats here.
Y'all know
We've seen Ukraine
Biden
under
say,
a
all
barrage
right,
of cyber
Ukraine.
attacks here.
Come on, we'll
And
fly
the
y'all
question is,
over here.
will
We'll take care
Vladimir
of y'all.
Putin and the Russian GRU, their cyber
We known
attack
for
unit,
that,
will
y'all.
they do anything outside of Ukraine?
Our border
They
is
already
still
are.
fucked up.
John, they've
The
done
Mexican border
detailed
is still fucked up,
reconnaissance
yo.
of all of Western infrastructure. One of the things
You know
I
what
do
I'm
know
saying?
about
They still
how they
sneaking motherfuckers
proceed
over
is
here
to
every
embed
day.
and to do reconnaissance and
Crossing
embed
the
things
border.
so that on call things can happen. Network operations, network targeting does not happen. One day it's like, oh, it's time to go. No. You can't plan these things out. You look at supply chains, you look at access points, and you get inside of those closed systems. So I would hazard to say that Putin is indeed weighing options regarding some of these offensive capabilities. And mark my words, John.
Putin got his man he gonna put up in
Putin
there.
so decided, he could do devastation to the U.S. infrastructure regarding what we call the basic control units that control everything we do. SCADA, supervisory control and data acquisition. John, everything we have is digitized. So those things are all vulnerable. And if you think having pipelines shut down in Europe is bad, wait till you start seeing more of that here. So again, I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I'm just simply trying to answer your question by the fact that I'm sure he's looking at everything across the world at this point in time.
We're not trying to hold anything back. We want to give our audience the most honest assessment of where things stand that we can.
It's about
I
being
appreciate that.
a realist. And I think, too, the other thing, cyber warfare, and then we're also in an information war, too. I find that.
Absolutely, Bianca.
I want to get your reaction. We knew the troops were being built up. Even U.S. intelligence, we heard he's going to go in. He's going to do this. But the way it's been, and we hear from people in Kyiv, Lieutenant, who said, we didn't even know this was going to happen. There were traffic jams this morning. That's human nature. It's really unfortunate. But the information war is very dynamic here when we're dealing with Putin.
Yeah, look, I ran the first undercover cyber unit that did information operations back in the 90s, and I'm well aware of the way you blend things together. And Bianca, to your point, Putin has mastered, his GRU and all his forces have mastered the blending of technology and messaging. And it's one thing to telegraph something and pretend it's not happening, and a lot of people did that. And he reinforced that where it suited him to do that. At this point, it's very clear. And by the way, we've been talking about this on John's show going way back.
Yep.
There were indications last summer that he was doing this. When you deploy all your forces for an exercise to Belarus and you leave them there and say, oh, we'll come back and get them later. No.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Planning
No.
something. Yeah.
Tony,
And
we're
so
gonna-
Work
these
like that, my
indications have
man.
been on the board
Y'all
for a
know
while.
that.
Tony, I hate to cut you off
That's
here, but we're
moves
going to
on
go
the
ahead and go
chessboard. You
now
don't
to
put all
Orlando, Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis is taking the stage
pieces
at
out
CPAC.
there and just leave
a
them
reminder
there.
of
Not unless
the
you
world we live in.
about to
This is
make
still
the move.
happening down in
You know what
Florida.
I'm saying?
And Governor DeSantis, obviously,
It's about
key figure of the
strategizing,
Republican Party.
y'all.
He's going to go ahead and speak.
Putin strategized,
We were expecting President
man.
Biden
He
to speak
wasn't
at
caring
1:30.
about
We're
that
going to listen
sanction
to
shit.
Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida here at CPAC.
Freeze his assets and all that. He probably got crypto. You see what I'm saying? He probably got Bitcoin.
Let me welcome you to the freest state in these United States. We were lucky to have CPAC in 2021, and I'm happy to inform you, 2021, Florida set an all-time record for domestic tourism coming into our state. And those record numbers include a number of lockdown politicians who lock down their own people, restrict their own people, mandate governors, mayors, big TV hosts. They criticize Florida, and the first chance they get, what do? They escape to freedom in the state of Florida. And why do even these biggest critics and lockdowners come to Florida? Well, I think it's simple. From the very beginning, we refused to let this state descend into some type of Faucian dystopia where people's freedoms are curtailed and their livelihoods are destroyed. We protected people's rights. We protected people's jobs. We protected small businesses, and we made sure that every kid in the state of Florida had an opportunity to go to school in person 5 days a week. Florida, we reject the biomedical security state, which erodes liberty, harms livelihoods, and divides our society. And we not only reject it if it's government, we have done things like ban vaccine passports and mandates.
It's in Florida, y'all.
Because it's unacceptable to simply subcontract out Fauciism to big companies. So we've stood for freedom across the board, and the result has been Florida has defeated Fauciism. Freedom has prevailed in the Sunshine State.
Y'all heard that live. You ain't gonna get that information, but
and
on this
Florida
channel.
led when it counted.
You know
we
what I'm
led
saying?
early on when the weight of the world was coming, bearing down on our shoulders. Everything we did, we were taking incoming. I remember the summer of 2020. We had the kids saying, you got to go have the kids in school. The teachers' unions, they would put coffins outside the Department of Education building in Tallahassee. They sued me to close the school. But we stood strong. And part of the reason we stood strong, because we understand what it means to be a leader. Not just be a politician that twists in the wind, but be willing to make the tough decisions. I look back at President Eisenhower's farewell address. Many of you remember it because he warned about the military-industrial complex. That was smart. He was right.
A leader.
But if you read that speech, he also warned about the dangers
Not no
of a rising
go along, get
scientific
along,
and
gang.
technological elite. Government was funding more scientific
puppet.
research, and he said when that happens, there's a danger that public policy can be held captive by this scientific elite. And he said, the job of the statesman is not to subcontract out your policy to health bureaucrats or other type of bureaucrats. The job of the statesman is to lead, to take all the interests in society and make sure you're doing what's in the public good. So many governors over the last 2 years would simply defer to health bureaucrats because it was a safe thing to do politically. If things went bad, they can say, hey, the bureaucrats told me I had to do this. Yeah, you lost your job. Sorry, your business is done. The kids are locked out of school, but they're telling me I have to do this. That is not what we did in Florida. And we did it when it wasn't popular. We did it when we were taking fire. And we did it because my duty is to stand up and protect the freedoms and the jobs of the people I represent. And if that puts me in political jeopardy, then so be it. I will stand with them. I'm not going to try to protect my own hide.
Talk your shit, man. Talk your shit.
And I really believe, had Florida not led the way, this country could look like Canada or Australia. We sometimes take freedom for granted. You should not do that after the last 2 years. It is contested. The left does not
waiting
want to
for Biden
honor our
to come,
freedoms,
y'all.
and we have
Biden
we
already
have
like damn near 2
responsibility to
hours
fight
late.
back on all fronts. People
Well, it's
are coming
definitely
to
an
Florida
hour
because
late
they want
because he was
freedom.
supposed to come to the podium
Even our
at
critics are
12:30.
doing it, but I can tell you there's one
It's
fella
1:41,
that
y'all.
just hates Florida, and his name is Joe Biden. He's
I'm saying?
always criticizing us, always trying to take pot shots at Florida. He does things like take our medication. He stiffs storm victims of relief just because he doesn't like the governor. He doesn't like Florida, and he doesn't like me because we stand up to him. That's why he doesn't like us.
Right, because you stand on your square. That's right. Stand on your square, man. Fuck that.
Last
Talk your
year, we
shit.
called a special session to protect every Florida job from Biden's vax mandates, and we succeeded. We've sent people to the Texas border and are suing Biden over his catch and release policy because he is not following the Constitution by letting our borders be overrun.
At all.
We stand up against the weak on crime policies that is ravaging cities all across the country and what he supports, and we are
We waiting for
standing
Joe
against
Biden,
his
y'all. Once he
reckless
come up
fiscal
on the panel,
policies where they
up on the
printed trillions
podium,
of dollars,
once he
and
come
now
back up
we
on the
have
podium,
rampant Bidenflation.
I'ma start
the
it again,
inflation
all right?
is because of his
Hold on, y'all.
policies, and we're not going to let anyone forget that. So
There go that weak weasel, y'all.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Sound like he was crying and shit.
Good afternoon. The Russian military he's begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification, without necessity, this is a premeditated attack. Vladimir Putin has been planning this for months, as we've been saying all along. He moved more than 175,000 troops, military equipment, and positions along the Ukrainian border. He moved blood supplies into position and built a field hospital,
Sound like
which
you got
tells
COVID.
you all you need to know about his intentions all along. He rejected every good faith effort the United States
why
and our
didn't you
allies and partners
intervene
made
with it if you
to
knew
address our
all
mutual
this?
security concerns through dialogue to avoid needless conflict and avert human suffering. For weeks, we have been warning that this would happen. And now it's unfolding largely as we predicted. In the past week, we've seen shelling increase in the Donbass, a region in eastern Ukraine controlled by Russian-backed separatists. The Russian government has perpetrated cyber attacks against Ukraine. We saw a staged political theater in Moscow, outlandish and baseless claims that Ukraine was about to invade and launch a war against Russia, that Ukraine was prepared to use chemical weapons, that Ukraine committed a genocide. Without any evidence, we saw a flagrant violation of international law in attempting to unilaterally create two new so-called republics
Y'all did that to
on
Saddam
sovereign
Hussein.
Ukrainian territory.
Ain't had no goddamn proof
And
that
at
he
the
had
very moment that the
gas.
United Nations Security Council was meeting to stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty, to stave off invasion, Putin declared his war. Within moments, missile strikes began to fall on historic cities across Ukraine. Then came the air raids, followed by tanks and troops rolling in. We've been transparent with the world. We've shared declassified evidence about Russia's plans and cyber attacks and false pretexts so that there could be no confusion or cover-up about what Putin was doing. Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies. I want to be clear, the United States is not doing this alone. For months, we've been building a coalition of partners representing well more than half the global economy. 27 members of the European Union, including France, Germany, Italy, as well as the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and many others, to amplify the joint impact of our response. I just spoke with the G7 leaders this morning, and we're in full and total agreement. We will limit Russia's ability to do business in dollars, euros, pounds, and yen to be part of the global economy. We'll limit their ability to do that. We're going to stunt the ability to finance and grow the Russian military. We're going to impose and we're going to impair their ability to compete in high-tech 21st century economy. We've already seen the impact of our actions on Russia's currency and the ruble, which early today hit its weakest level ever in history. The Russian stock market plunged today. The Russian government's borrowing rate spiked by over 15%. In today's actions, we've now sanctioned Russian banks that together hold around $1 trillion in assets. We've cut off Russia's largest bank, a bank that holds more than 1/3 of Russia's banking assets by itself, cut it off from the U.S. financial system. And today, we're also blocking 4 more major banks. That means every asset they have in America will be frozen. This includes VTB, the second largest bank in Russia, which has $250 billion in assets. As promised, we're also adding the names to the list of Russian elites and their family members that we're sanctioning as well. As I said on Tuesday, these are people who personally gain from the Kremlin's policies, and they should share in the pain. We will keep up this drumbeat of those designations against corrupt billionaires in the days ahead. On Tuesday, we stopped the Russian government from raising money from U.S. or European investors.
They in the chat
Now
room
we're going to
snapping,
apply
yo.
the same restrictions to Russia's largest state-owned
Chat off the hook,
enterprises.
yo.
Companies with assets that exceed $1.4 trillion. Some of the most powerful impacts our actions will come over time as we squeeze Russia's access to finances and technology for strategic sectors of its economy and degrade its industrial capacity for years to come. Between our actions and those of our allies and partners, we estimate that we'll cut off more than half of Russia's high-tech imports. It'll strike a blow to their ability to continue to modernize their military. It'll degrade their aerospace industry, including their space program. It'll hurt their ability to build ships, reducing their ability to compete
Man, who
economically.
gives a fuck about that? We
And
talking
it'll be a
about right
major
now,
hit to
motherfuckers.
Putin's long-term strategic ambitions. And we're preparing to do more. In addition to the economic penalties we're imposing, we're also taking steps to defend our NATO allies, particularly in the East. Tomorrow, NATO will convene a summit. We'll be there to bring together the leaders of 30 allied nations and close partners to affirm our solidarity and to map out the next steps we will take to further strengthen all aspects of our NATO alliance. Although we provided over $650 million in defensive assistance to Ukraine just this last year, let me say it again. Our forces are not and will not be engaged in the conflict with Russia in Ukraine. Our forces are not going to Europe to fight in Ukraine, but to defend our NATO allies and reassure those allies in the East. As I made crystal clear, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory with the full force of American power. And the good news is, NATO is more united and more determined than ever. There is no doubt that the United States and every NATO ally will meet our Article 5 commitments, which says that an attack on one is an attack on all. Over the past few weeks, I ordered thousands of additional forces to Germany and Poland as part of our commitment to NATO. On Tuesday, in response to Russia's aggressive action, including its troop presence in Belarus and the Black Sea, I've authorized deployment of ground and air forces already stationed in Europe to NATO's eastern flank allies, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Romania. Our allies have also been stepping up, adding the other allies, the rest of NATO, adding their own forces and capabilities to ensure collective defense. And today, within hours of Russia's unleashing its assault, NATO came together and authorized and activated an activation of response plans. This will enable NATO's high readiness forces to deploy and when and where they are needed to protect our NATO allies on the eastern boundaries of Europe. And now I'm authorizing additional U.S. force capabilities to deploy to Germany as part of NATO's response, including some of the U.S.-based forces that the Department of Defense placed on standby weeks ago. I've also spoken with Defense Secretary Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs General Milley about preparations for additional moves should they become necessary to protect our NATO allies and support the greatest military alliance in the history of the world, NATO. As we respond, my administration is using every tool at its disposal to protect American families and businesses from rising prices at the gas pump. You know, we're taking active steps to bring down the cost, and American oil and gas companies should not exploit this moment to hike their prices to raise profits. You know, in our sanctions package, we specifically designed to allow energy payments to continue.
Gas prices
We are
are already up. They've
monitoring
been
energy
up.
supplies for any
What are
disruption.
you talking about, idiot?
We've been coordinating with major oil-producing and consuming countries toward our common interest to secure global energy supplies.
Dude, lying, y'all.
We are actively working with countries around the world to elevate collective release from the strategic petroleum reserves of major energy-consuming countries. And the United States will release additional barrels of oil as conditions warrant. I know this is hard, and that Americans are already hurting. I will do everything in my power to limit the pain the American people are feeling at the gas pump. This is critical to me. But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If it did, consequences for America would be much worse. America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom.
What?
This is who we are.
But you had the
I also
mass
repeat the warning
mandates
I
in
made
effect,
last
though.
week.
Fuck
If
out of
Russia
here,
pursues
dude.
cyber attacks against our companies, our critical infrastructure, we are prepared to respond. For months, we've been working closely with the private sector to harden our cyber defenses, sharpen our ability to respond to Russian cyber attacks as well. I spoke last night to President Zelensky of Ukraine, and I assured him
They're gonna
the
drag
United States, together with
Zelensky
our allies and partners in
through
Europe,
Ukraine
will
like they
support the
did
Ukrainian
Muammar
people
Gaddafi.
as they defend their country. We'll provide you humanitarian relief to ease their suffering. And in the early days of this conflict, Russian propaganda outlets will keep trying to hide the truth and claim success for its military operation against a made-up threat. But history has shown, time and again, how swift gains in territory eventually give way to grinding
Like the made-up
occupations,
virus.
acts of mass civil disobedience, and strategic dead ends. The next few weeks and months will be hard on the people of Ukraine. Putin has unleashed a great pain on them. But the Ukrainian people have known 30 years of independence. They have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. This is a dangerous moment for all of Europe, for the freedom around the world. Putin has committed an assault on the very principles that uphold the global peace. Now, the entire world sees clearly what Putin and his Kremlin allies are really all about. This was never about a genuine security concerns on their part. It was always about naked aggression, about Putin's desire for empire by any means necessary, by bullying Russia's neighbors through coercion and corruption, by changing borders by force, and ultimately by choosing a war without a cause. Putin's actions betray his sinister vision for the future of our world, one where nations take what they want by force. But it is a vision that the United States and freedom-loving nations everywhere will oppose with every tool of our considerable power. The United States and our allies and partners will emerge from this stronger, more united, more determined, and more purposeful. Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that. Putin will be a pariah on the international stage. Any nation that countenances Russia's naked aggression against Ukraine will be stained by association. The history of this era is written. Putin's choice to make a totally unjustifiable war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. Liberty, democracy, human dignity, these are the forces far more powerful than fear and oppression. They cannot be extinguished by tyrants like Putin and his armies. They cannot be erased by from people's hearts and hopes by any amount of violence and intimidation. They endure. In the contest between democracy and autocracy, between sovereignty and subjugation, make no mistake, freedom will prevail. God bless the people of a free and democratic Ukraine. May God protect our troops. Associated Press, Zeke.
With President Putin at this point, and what interactions have you had with the Russian government?
I heard the first part. Do I have any plans to speak with Putin at this point, and what?
What communications have you had with the Kremlin as far as military offers to Ukraine and making sure this does not spiral into a larger conflict?
Well, it's a large conflict already. The way we're going to ensure it's not going to spiral to a larger conflict is by providing all the forces needed in the Eastern European nations that are members of NATO. NATO is more united than it's ever been, and I have no plans to talk with Putin. Wall Street Journal, Tarina.
You gotta listen to people that he's talking to, yo.
Mr. President, you didn't mention SWIFT in your sanctions that you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. Isn't doing that? Is there disagreement among allies regarding SWIFT and whether Russia should be allowed to be a part of it?
The sanctions that we propose on all their banks are of equal consequence, maybe more consequence than SWIFT, number one. Number two, it is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take. Cecilia Vega, ABC.
He got a list that he reading from, y'all.
Sir, sanctions clearly have
And you
not been
just
enough to
can't
deter Vladimir
put
Putin
your
to this
opinion
point.
in. He got a
What
list
is going
of
to
the
stop
people he
him?
talking to.
How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine? And a second question I'll just give to you now. This statement that he gave last night, the threat that he gave the West will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Is he threatening a nuclear strike?
I have no idea what he's threatening. I know what he has done, number one. And number two, no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. This is going to take time, and we have to show resolve so he knows what's coming. And so the people of Russia know what he's brought on them. That's what this is all about. This is going to take time. It's not going to occur. He's going to say, oh my God, these sanctions are coming. I'm going to stand down.
Put the video up.
He's going to test the resolve of the West to see if we stay together, and we will. We will, and
All right, we've been listening to President Biden speaking at the White House today on Ukraine, taking questions from the press corps. We're going to hand it off now to American Agenda. They're going to continue our special coverage here on Newsmax TV.
Markets are down and gas prices are up. I know you all stress the difference, but painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond. And markets are going to respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that. Number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's the next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin, and would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a worthy adversary?
At the time, I made it clear as an adversary, and I said he was worthy. I didn't underestimate him. And I've read most of everything he's written. Did you read it? I shouldn't say, I'm not a wise guy. You heard the speech he made, almost an hour's worth of speeches, why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions...
No, it ain't. It's about you being a weak weasel. That's what it's about.
Contrary
you being a
to
weak
the place
weasel.
where the rest of the world has arrived.
And with his ambitions, you're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
President Biden, if sanctions cannot stop President Putin, what penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and